Okay, hi there, and welcome back to season 3 of Cyburst, a podcast about science, popular culture, and entertainment. And welcome to our very first live show.
So good.
I can see a few familiar faces in the audience and a few brand new ones. So welcome everybody, and thanks so much for coming. This podcast is for everyone, no matter if you're a software engineer, a painter, a knitter, or a neuroscientist. We are your hosts, Isabel
and Ella, and we are two science communicators and solar punk enthusiasts taking this podcast on a journey this season into hopeful futures. So coming up for you this episode, we're talking about science, community, and third places. We are coming to you live straight from the wonderful third place that is the Woden Library community rooms woo, in Canberra, ACT. And at the time of recording this live show, we haven't released any of our season 3 episodes yet. So our lucky live audience in the crowd is getting a very special sneak peek, and we're so excited about that. And before we dive into it, it is really important that we acknowledge country and that this episode of Cyburst is being recorded on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. So I'm going to do an acknowledgement in Ngunnawal language. Daura Nuna, Daura Ngunnawal, Yangu, Nani Manyan, Duni Manyan, Ngunnawal Wari, Dawa Wari, Dindi, One Girilijin Yin. This is Ngunnawal country. Today, we are all meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders.
Thanks so much, Ella. That's always lovely to hear in language. And like you said, it's always important to remember where we are. And for our live audience, I just want to draw your attention to the artwork we have behind us. This is a painting called Relationships by a Ngunnawal woman called Lenice Letty Keane. And the symbols in it represent two people reaching out and coming together at a meeting place. The smaller circles represent connection and community relationships, and the outer lines represent the journey towards true reconciliation and our walk together, while the outer arches symbolize place and diversity of community. And I think this is really beautiful and fitting for this podcast episode, all about the science of community and third places.
Yeah, absolutely.
So without further ado, let's dive into it. So Ella, do you want to give a bit of background on third places?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to give us just a little introduction to third places for this first part of the podcast. As always, our Cyburst episodes are split into 3 parts. So like I said, the first section is going to be some context on third spaces, places, and community. The second is going to touch on the science and evidence behind community space and the good it brings us. And then our third part will be how all of this fits in together for our vision of a future, better solar punk world. So with that said, part 1, community spaces, third places, walkable communities. Basically, this is kind of like a how-to guide for community. And we're going to start at the top with a definition of third places and spaces. You might be wondering, wow, Ella and Isabel have mentioned this like 4 times.
Yeah.
What are they actually talking about? The term third space comes from 1989 and an American ecologist and former politician, Ray Oldenburg, in his book, The Great Good Place. So this term refers to community places that function as a place to bring people together and a place where conversations and dialogues happen frequently and very comfortably. So this is where kind of like the phrase started out from, and there are a lot of criticisms to Oldenburg's work, but a lot of work builds off of it, and that kind of takes us to the meaning of third places, which we're going to talk about today, which is kind of like where that theory has transition to. So Oldenburg posits that third spaces are informal public gathering spaces, but a more modern understanding of these would be specifically places that welcome all types of people, places of importance for everyone in the neighborhood. And that's really, really crucial to our solar punk understanding of this concept. Yeah. So like we said, we're recording this at a library. A library is a great third space representation. Oldenburg's book mainly refers to kind of like bars. But you can argue that parks and other natural spaces as well as buildings are third places. And typically there should be like a really low barrier cost to entry physically or in terms of money and accessibility as well.
Yeah, so third places are essentially anywhere that's not at home, which is a first place, or work or school, which is a second place. And these places are neutral and accessible places, like you were saying, Ella, that are also often walkable and offering social connection. And examples include libraries, like the one we're in today, local parks, farmers markets, the beach, gyms, coffee shops, and so on. You can also have this thing called virtual third places.
Ooh, tell me more.
Which serve different purposes. Embodiment is a really important part of in-person third places, whereas online or virtual third places are things like forums, social media groups, online games, which can definitely still be places for connecting with others and building community, but don't have that physical or nature aspect necessarily. And here I actually just wanted to talk quickly about virtual third places and teenagers.
Okay.
Because we've kind of created this problem of, well, we don't have spaces for you to hang out safely, or many of them, but why are you guys on your phone all the time? And so I'm thinking that maybe teenagers are gravitating towards online third places because there aren't really in-person ones for them. And third places like skate parks are good, but not everyone is interested in that. Not every teenager is interested in that. And we really need diversity and probably more dedicated teen spaces that are open outside of school hours.
Yeah, and like you said, that embodiment and being able to physically be in that space is really important, as well as the online spaces. And I've actually seen some discourse recently that refers to online community spaces that aren't work or home, being referred to as fourth places. They are an additional thing to third places. They fulfill kind of like a different need in the community.
Oh,
yeah. So while we're talking about fulfilling needs in the community, I think it's also important to touch on spaces that aren't meant for every person, because we actually have quite a lot of those right now. And I think this is why me and you and a lot of other people, third places is a really popular topic in discourse right now. I think a lot of the reason why we're looking for better or more third places is because some spaces aren't designed for everyone. Some things that come to mind for me are hostile design structure. So public spaces that might have, extra armrests on public benches for anti-homelessness. You might see spikes or otherwise structures to prevent skateboarders. And we also see, infrastructure that isn't accessible to everybody, including stairs that prevent easy access for less able people, and also a lack of benches for resting spots. And that's just hostile design structure. There are also a bunch of other places that aren't for everyone. So commercial spaces can choose who they let in, and that's why not every commercial space is a third space. So things like gentlemen's clubs are obviously excluded or exclusive. Spaces that exclude people for the way they dress or appear don't really fall into this category of third places. Places with age restrictions, again, like we said, teenagers are an age that we kind of don't have a lot of space for, which is crazy because everyone is a teenager.
At some point.
Yeah. Not right now. Oh, I love the laughs. That's cool. I love recording live. This is great. And also I found out recently through researching for this podcast episode, actually, that some public parks don't allow entry to everyone or are closed at certain times. I think that's interesting. And another space or reason why people might not be allowed into spaces, things and reasons that would prevent these from being classified as third spaces, is recently we see a lot more new things popping up in terms of surveillance of spaces and who upkeeps those rules. So there are some interesting ideas that, you know, we could do a whole podcast on unpacking who reinforces the rules of public spaces. But also I've seen in public spaces recently, sometimes entry is dependent on sharing information of being watched via camera, including CCTV. And even more recently, sometimes entering a public space, the condition of that is your biometrics being tracked. So I think there's a question of, is that actually a fair price to pay for entering a public space?
Yeah. Because like at that point, is it a safe third place anymore? Also, this is all sounding a little bit negative. I realize that, but I promise it's going to get more and more positive as we go on.
Yeah. I think it's important to reflect, like in this first part of the podcast on community spaces, why we feel the need to talk about it and why there should be more. Particularly because sometimes we might have third spaces, wonderful third spaces that can disappear. And a lot of dialogue and conversation in this space right now is about COVID-19 and how this, you know, global pandemic actually took away quite a lot of third spaces. So this was a time where third spaces kind of really entered the public dialogue. Obviously it was a time, and I don't want to spend too much time here because, you know, it's kind of not very nice to reflect on, but we all felt different to normal, maybe isolated, alienated, confused, and a whole host of other things. And as we began replicating some of these feelings online, that's kind of when we saw like these fourth online spaces opening up, but they were missing something. We were still craving that connection, the physicality, the embodiment, the X factor, the je ne sais quoi of being in a place with people and connecting to those people in person. Something that, you know, video chats just couldn't quite close that connection gap on.
Yeah, I remember when we were going through lockdowns and there was just this constant craving of like, I really badly need to go for a walk to my local park, but that was not always allowed, which is really hard. So
that's like a great example of you craving that third space and really, really wanting to get there and go there. Yeah. And Oldenburg's later book, his 1999 kind of like re-revision on this topic, actually comments on what is the cost of losing our third spaces. And this book kind of says that without these third community spaces, we lose the protective factors as resilience mechanisms that these offer us. So essentially he says that we lose the buffers this space provides us against stress, loneliness, inactivity, and even alienation. And in particular, there's a really cool academic article by Finley and other academics that the whole article is about the closure of third spaces. And it highlights that work from previous academics suggests that closing these spaces disproportionately impact certain demographics. And those demographics, unsurprisingly, are children, teenagers who we've mentioned, but also older adults, people who are chronically ill, and people who are socioeconomically marginalized, which again, I think we did see through the COVID-19 pandemic.
And for sure.
Is a really good, convincing reason, particularly I think for me, of why we need spaces for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so now we've got quite a comprehensive background on
and all the negativity out the way.
And we've got some definitions there that are going to be helpful for later on. We're going to move now to our second section of this episode, all about the science of community and third places. So the first sort of science aspect that I wanted to touch on is the sustainability aspect or the sustainability potential of third places. So third places can be walkable communities that foster sustainability. I saw a really interesting social media post, and I'll share it later on Instagram after this episode comes out. And it was exploring why people have a desire to go on cruises or to theme parks or back to their university campus years, or even just live closer to the local markets. And they were essentially exploring this idea of, is this because we as humans crave walkable communities and sustainability? And I think so.
Is that what they concluded?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
And there was a really interesting dialogue going on in the comment section of that too. And if you think about third places, a lot of them are walkable communities. So, for example, farmers markets, they allow people to enjoy walking between vendors and running into neighbours. Theme parks allow visitors to walk all day between attractions and food spots. And those ones are even designed to look like small towns or small cities.
Yeah, you're so right.
And university is a time when food, friends, and class are all in a short walking or biking distance from each other. And so all these aspects are really great for walkable communities, environmental sustainability, but also our health sustainability, I think, which I think Ella is going to talk a bit more about.
Okay, I absolutely am. And I think it's so cool that when we think about our public spaces, we can also think about public health, because the two are actually more interrelated than you might think. So going back to that Finley academic article, there's a quote from that says, focusing on third places can advance multiple domains of health, geography, and public health, including upstream socio-geographic conditions that impose downstream barriers to health, neighbourhood-level protective factors, and sources of resiliency, and the importance of place and context. Which is, beautiful and very succinct, but kind of hard to unpack when you just hear it once.
Yeah.
So basically these academics are arguing that there are so many benefits and carry-on effects of having access to community spaces that it almost impacts every single area of public health. And that what happens, in a park or when you have access to a really great public space, that has so many flow-on effects that can impact every single area, which is so cool. And I think, immediately lots of the third spaces like outdoor gyms come to mind in terms of what those places can provide you, but even in terms of herd immunity. If you're someone who is unable to be vaccinated, having a community around you who's vaccinated, that is a benefit to your immune system.
Yeah.
So,
interesting.
It's really cool. Yeah, and it kind of leads me into another point that we did bring up a little earlier in part one, but about how third places and community spaces are helping to address the pressing challenges we face in our communities. So even though third places are often overlooked, they actually represent essential sites to address society's pressing challenges, including isolation, including crime, including education, addiction, physical inactivity, malnutrition, and socio-political polarization. So kind of Finley, Jay, again, and these academics are arguing that anything that could be seen as a challenge to society, there is a third place that could benefit that challenge to society or kind of work to address that challenge in society for, as listed, a whole bunch of different challenges, which is really cool and significant. And it makes me think of what I saw a lot in our communities, particularly, again, during the pandemic. But I saw that little libraries were really popular.
Yeah.
So kind of like that sharing of education, of physical items, particularly those that maybe wouldn't carry as much virus for as long, for little bits of brightness on your, allowed walks. So I think that's really interesting that they popped up a lot during COVID.
Yeah.
But I actually think now, not that we're necessarily out of the pandemic, but now I see a lot more free community food pantries popping up, which seems to kind of, be directly addressing a different challenge that we're significantly facing as a society right now, which is the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
So even little tiny third spaces, such as something the size of a mini fridge directly relate to what gaps we're feeling, and they're trying to address these challenges.
Yeah, that's really cool. It seems like COVID is a really important case study here in terms of showing like the importance of third places and having that connection.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued that that's where a lot of people kind of picked up this conversation about third places again. Kind of like being isolated from everything reminded us about how important it is to stay connected, and people were thinking deeply and, you know, trying to solve these problems.
Yeah, I don't know if you also saw that there was a bunch of like posts that came out where like the internet went down overseas. Was it in Spain?
Yes.
Was it in Spain? Yeah. And there was all these really interesting like social media posts about people like reconnecting with their neighborhoods and finding third places to go to and spend time at because they didn't have social media or like internet or
or like people working unable to do their jobs because that relies a lot on electricity and kind of like digital connectedness kind of just abandoned their jobs, and everyone collectively decided, well, no work is happening today. People going out into the street. I saw lots of videos of people kind of like sharing bottles of wine or lemonade, and kind of one person would bring like a resource to a group of people they were sitting with, and everyone would kind of gather round. I also saw lots of videos of people getting out their books and reading like books in the park or on the street, and then the video would zoom out and you'd see, you know, rather than the 3 people it was focused on, like the 20 people who were all doing the same thing. It's interesting how like-minded people can become when there's a barrier to the things we have pressures on to do.
Yeah, for sure. I also saw a lot of people dancing and singing, just coming out into the street, like they're in their neighborhoods doing that, which
Isn't that so joyous? Imagine if there were like more spaces that curated that. I think that's so special. And I think also neighborhoods mean perhaps more than we might care to think about day to day. So like an academic, I guess, definition of a neighborhood would be that places in which people live, work, play, and receive care, and that these represent a convergence between the built and the social environment, which I think is a very, very interesting point. A building is not a third place. It has to have that social and community element.
Okay, yes,
to be a neighborhood, not even to be a third space. So I think that's a very interesting, similarity they share. And apparently literature generally concludes that living in neighborhoods with limited accesses to resources such as healthy foods, recreational opportunities, and higher levels of social disorder such as distrust or violence, that is time and time again associated with negative health outcomes. So again, we go back to how this impacts your health and your body. And people who live in those types of communities often rate that they have poorer self-rated health, stress, and a higher prevalence of even chronic disease and increased mortality. So living in a good community is really good for you.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's not something we necessarily think about day to day, or, you know, maybe we think about when we're moving house. But there's actually so many cool and meaningful impacts that being part of a neighborhood gives.
Yeah, especially like the social support aspect, because I even remember how important that was during COVID too, because that was the only really social interactions that you got to have was your local, like very, very local community. And also anyone who owns a dog will know too, like you get to meet all of your neighbors, and that becomes really important too. I only knew my immediate neighbors before I had a dog, but now
wow, dog unlocks community. Yes. You heard it here first.
It's true.
It's true. Even people who don't have dogs, if you have one, you know, they'll want to come and pat it. Oftentimes, I'm thinking not just in the vans of COVID, but when we had a family dog, I remember lots of kids on the street as we walked, you know, wanting to come and pat our dog who looked like a puppy all throughout his life. And I think that's really special too. Like what a cool moment of connection that wouldn't be there without that animal. So interesting bringing that non-human element into kind of this discussion of people and place and space. Yeah. So cool. And actually, a recent study published in Nature has established that your lifestyle choices impact your longevity, so your lifespan, more than your genetics, which I think is something we're kind of told the opposite of, but this study reinforces this perspective. So environmental factors, and this includes your neighborhood, your Yeah, so environmental factors, they account for 17% of variation in your lifespan, whereas genetics, according to the study, only impact 2%, which is actually like a huge difference. Pretty big. So I think it's really important here. And hearing this study, it made me reflect a lot on how our neighbors, our community, our friends deeply impact us, even to the level in which the length of life we achieve is, which is kind of phenomenal. One thing to note about this study is this was observational. So while in science we say we can't presume causality, we can really look at this correlation. And I think hopefully this is something we see more studies on.
Yeah.
And is maybe also something I'll touch on a little later, but I'll just leave that breadcrumb there.
Yeah, for sure. And that's all really interesting because I came across separate studies that are kind of linked to this and neighborhoods and longevity. And they were on urban education and childhood development. So these studies found that third places help students create positive associations with school and academic responsibilities and achievement, and also help them build self-confidence in the longer term. And there's a blogger who was writing about these studies, and he gives a personal anecdote of this and talks about his own experience with the third place of the skate park as a kid, which I brought up earlier. So this is what he writes, quote, "Through skateboarding, I learned that if you aren't falling, you aren't learning. Becoming comfortable with falling down, getting back up, and asking for help allowed me to push myself and trust my abilities. The more confident I got with skating, the more confident I became as a person. This was especially helpful in making Common Core math problems less terrifying. Multiple studies have found that once a strong positive relationship is established between the student and school through third places, positive changes in regard to self-perception, confidence, and aspirations follow." So it's showing that like third places really help build resilience. And actually these studies found that once these positive associations form, academic benefits emerge too. So students who visit third places more regularly are less likely to drop out of school, have significantly higher scores in maths, reading and core classes, have regular homework completion, and are also more likely to enjoy solving complex problems in the longer term, which is a really big indicator of longer term success too.
Yeah, I really love how kind of in your most recent example and the one that I just brought up, we know we're talking a lot about community, which is this really collective thing with collective benefits oftentimes. But it's interesting also that it does deeply impact the individual on the genetic and also academic and feeling good and happy and healthy about your life as well. So it's interesting that these spaces can kind of span that whole spectrum of the individual to small groups to big groups to what we nebulously refer to as community, which is kind of anything up to the whole population of the world.
Yeah, it's like your audience thing, Ella, where it's like audience can mean so many different things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, okay. So switching now from third places and students and everything we've talked about so far, and to sort of bring this section together more a little bit.
Okay, exciting.
There's a lecturer from the University of Canberra, actually.
Wow, that's local.
I know. Great community representation.
Wow, we are in a space and a place, and I'll tell you that right now.
So this academic found a 75% increase in the use of accessible green spaces during the pandemic, which is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. And she says this shows how vital these spaces are as quote unquote community facilities. And it's really important that these spaces are spread out so that everyone can have access to those spaces where they live, especially as more people work from home and need more in-person community spaces. So like we sort of touched on, third places are really good for our mental health and well-being, particularly when a place like a share house or a workplace might feel a little bit chaotic or busy or crowded. And you want to go sit in a park or another local third place to eat lunch or read a book. And like we touched on a bit earlier before too, what happens if the internet goes down? Community and in-person third places become really important for connection, knowledge sharing, and to rebuild. And places like libraries, for example, like the one we're in today, are becoming community living rooms.
Oh, I love that phrase. Yeah, that's really cool.
It's a phrase I read in an ABC article recently, which I think we'll also link after this episode goes up. And libraries are really keeping people connected, particularly those from regional areas, which is what the article was discussing, and how they offer literature, internet access, knowledge access more generally, craft clubs, citizen science, storytelling, and more. And they do all of this for free too.
Yeah, so cool, so crucial. Pillars of the community. I think that's why we're so excited to be here and reinforce that. But what you were saying before was interesting, talking about, we've discussed third spaces as being a space other than work or home.
Yeah.
If you work from home, third spaces kind of almost have to pull like double their weight, because everything you do can be, contained in the same building. So getting outside of that building is really important. And some might even say that getting outside that building and touching grass is even more important. And this is a thought I had this morning that I was like, Isabel, we got to find a place to talk about this. And we've spoken a little bit about how kind of internet slang, or specifically like talk from video games, enters, popular speech patterns, and kind of become naturalized. And in the same way that third spaces, in their original text kind of meant bars, which I wouldn't say are very community spaces, particularly when we're talking about children and teenagers.
Yeah.
But kind of like the modern understanding of third spaces is something much more community oriented and wholesome, may I dare posit, more wholesome than a dive bar, which is repeatedly comes up in that book, which I think is an interesting place to start the third space talk from. But I also think about the phrase touch grass, how kind of at first it was like a little bit derogatory.
Yeah, it's a negative thing. Yeah.
It was like get outside and touch grass. And I think that kind of happened. And then there was the pandemic and everyone was like, oh, I wish I could touch grass. And now I think it's still around, it's a little less popular, but I think a little more broad spread at the same time. And I think now saying touch grass is a little more wholesome. Yeah. And you had another similar example.
My Instagram is full of reels that are like, when you get the feminine urge to just hug a tree for an hour. And it's just someone just walking out to the tree and hugging the tree.
But we see kind of like that really positive framing where people are like, particularly in online spaces, so much more accepting that the online space can't offer you everything. Yeah. And it's really important to find a third space and touch the grass and hug the tree and acknowledge that as a human being, you deserve to be fulfilled in all the areas that call to you. Yeah. A weird place to wrap up that article or that kind of like second section on all the good things that community can bring you. But I think it's important to kind of reflect back on, we just covered a whole bunch of ground of how community spaces, like by literally being in this room and listening to this podcast, like this is impacting like in a small, minute way, like your health and well-being and how connected you feel with other people and your chance of revisiting this space and a whole host of other incredible things. And hopefully you also feel like really good while doing this.
Yes.
And I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
And it just makes me really, really positive for kind of like the future of if we can do this now, how can we become even more interrelated and have even better community spaces and places in the future, heading to a more sustainable world where the definition of sustainable also includes social.
Yes.
So I guess let's move into talking about
let's do it. Positive futures.
Positive futures, how this ties into solar punk. So this is part of our season on solar punk, which is kind of like essentially a movement about communities and environment and technology, and how collecting the three of them together will lead us to a really, really positive place and away from you know, a cyberpunk hellscape that we sometimes may feel like we're getting towards in our day-to-day.
Yes. And so our first 2 episodes of this season, which haven't come out yet, and you guys are getting a very exclusive recording here, we did one on the systems part, like the technology part, one on the like the sort of punk aspect, and of course this is our like community aspect episode.
Yeah, so we don't get to really cool things without people working together.
Yeah,
is kind of the solar punk vibe. But more specifically in this episode, we want to talk also about the access to third spaces we have now, and more than like the physical, tangible good that we can see communities bring, which might be new technologies, or even like physical spaces, but talk about kind of like this intangible community space, and the space can be like a little bit of pavement with chalk on it.
Yeah.
And the reason we want to talk about this is because, and by this I mean talk about the future of communities and community spaces, is because one of the things people find the hardest to imagine is how we get to a future that's more positive than now. Yeah. So the reason we really love solar punk and narratives is it's because this tells us and shows us the way to get to a more positive future where we have more community interaction and a whole host of other things. And where also these community places are abundant and meaningful and accessible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's have a chat about this beautiful future we want to like paint and build and get to collectively.
Yes, it's definitely harder to think about the more positive things that could arise versus negative. It's easier to be negative. So let's talk about a few things that we could see in the future of community.
Yes.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that third places and walkable communities are great, but we also need to make sure that they are accessible.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think we will see more of this in our community futures for sure. And so I'm thinking about things like, well, actually Ella touched on this a little bit at the start of the episode, but things like wider paths for wheelchair users, less stairs and more ramps, flatter and less uphill. Objects need to be easy to navigate around for people who are blind or have vision impairment, and even having more benches or rest stops every couple 100 meters makes it more accessible, or being open and available outside of regular business hours or school hours. And we have to, in doing this, address both the physical infrastructure and also everyone's subjective experience of walkability and scheduling for it to be truly accessible. And instead of asking what's wrong with the community or with a person, we should be reframing to ask what's wrong with the facilities or the infrastructure. And so I really think that future third places will have more of this emphasis on flexibility, adaptability, and community-driven design.
Yeah, so our future third spaces, we hope are even more accessible than our current spaces and build on our current adaptive designs, or even are co-designed from the very beginning if they're new spaces, to kind of be more accessible. And I think that's so exciting. And knowing that we have so many of those solutions here already, it's just implementing, I think, is a really tangible way of seeing the future. Like, we're so close to this being like a little bit better for everyone, not just, 80% of the population, which is so cool and excites me so much. I feel like I've just been like lit up a little bit inside thinking about that. I also want to talk about like another barrier that I can see being cut down in the future, and making places, again, more accessible. But in this kind of like scenario, the barrier I'm talking about is cost. So again, in the original imagining of third spaces, these are places where you go to and you pay a little bit of money, but not much. And it's not supposed to be a big barrier. You should just be able to, grab a coffee or a drink. But I do think that a lot of places that we find really fun and that we'd maybe love to hang out, particularly at the moment, again, in a bit of a cost of living crisis, these places have a huge cost barrier, and we don't want to go and get a coffee every day. Like we feel like we can't justify that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have spaces. So I think in the future, our community spaces will have even less of a cost barrier.
Yeah.
And there's a solution, and get this, the solution might just be community.
Yeah. So
there's this brilliant solar punk magazine called Solar Punk Magazine. And they're actually great. They do exactly what they say on the tin. And they talk about the barrier to entry for them as creators of wanting to eat organic food, invest in a home battery, invest in a renewable powered car. And they talk a lot about how climate change is a global and systematic problem that we are trying to solve. And these are actions they'd like to take towards, getting to there. But they talk about because it's a global and systematic problem, it has to be a collective movement to solve it. And that's where community comes in. So a group demanding change. So bringing down these barriers together, and they talk about how in community we will find answers to these problems.
Yeah.
And then it would be easier for everyone to have a home battery, or maybe instead of everyone trying to focus individually on a home battery, there might be a community battery. So a lot of our individual problems, because they're part of such a huge system, community is the answer, which I think is so delightful.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I guess if you want to get like really solar punk about it too, I think you would get even more green spaces. Like a lot of the third spaces would be green spaces and would be interacting more with the home or with school or work too.
Yeah, because I think the other thing is like when we feel that a problem is individual, we can only apply our individual skill set to it.
Yeah.
But when it's a community problem, all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch more interesting people and cool ideas to kind of bring into the mix.
Yeah, and to also get a bit meta about it too.
Okay, tell me.
The problems of the third places at the moment will be resolved in the third places if it's about community. So
yeah, and that's exactly what we were kind of talking about earlier, is that community finds the problems that community faces. So cool.
Yeah. And so I personally really believe that third places, especially those like this library that we're recording in and gathering in, are the heartbeat and the glue of community, and that they will become even more vibrant and important in the future.
So beautifully spoken.
Thanks.
Wow. And I think reflecting back on everything we've spoken about, in using those words kind of as a framing, we've spoken a lot about the good that community can bring, the importance of gathering, the importance of friendship, the importance of time and of places and of spaces where we can do this. We just wanted to draw your attention to everyone who is in the room tonight. And we wanted to give an extra big thank you to everyone who's here making this podcast recording so special. And we really knew that this was the topic that we wanted to bring to an audience and a community. And it's so exciting to be able to share this with you now in the room. Thank you for gathering. We really hope that a solar-punked future and the solar-punked future of our podcast is and can be a time, place and space for all of these beautiful moments to occur. So it's really great being able to see that happen. Often it does happen on that fourth online space, which is still beautiful, but there's something really special about talking about community to community in a beautiful little room. And so we really hope that by being here tonight, your day is a little lovelier. We hope your future is a little brighter. And we really hope that you look for all the pockets of community around you, particularly in this coming week. See what you notice and tell me. I'd love to know. And we also hope you think about your role in community. And we hope that in thinking about that, it really makes you smile and it brings you kind of like that warmth that this cozy podcast is trying to bring now. But we hope it brings you that, over the course of the coming days. And we also did want to thank those people who are listening over the airwaves for also being our community of people who listen, who watch and who engage.
Yes.
And on that note, that's kind of the content of this podcast wrapped up. But we've delivered on our three things. But we like to end our podcast additionally on some good news and talk about some happy things going on in the world right now in a bit of a good news segment.
Yes.
So let's jump into that.
Yeah, we do. So we're doing these good news bits this season because it's a season all about positivity and hopeful futures. So, and we always like to end on a positive anyway as well.
So it's so great that our whole topic was positive anyway. And now we can just bring it to a cool little close here.
Yes.
The good news story I wanted to share today is very on theme and I'm very excited about it. And it is that friendships, specifically friendships, we touched a bit on community earlier, but friendships are shown in peer-reviewed articles to contribute to longer lifespans, whether throughout your whole life, but also specifically in old age. And that actually comes from a 2005 Australian study. So we're in the place in the space. Other studies show that having a strong social network reduces your stress, lowers the risk of disease, and increases longevity. And that's a 2010 study and a 2004 study. So those are kind of old. But the reason I'm bringing it up now in our news, in our current segment, is that a more recent and somewhat more robust study in 2023, and this studied about 13,000 people, highlighted that stronger friendships are associated with better outcomes across all indicators they measured. Every single indicator they measured, friendships positively increase that.
Oh my God.
So that's across physical health, health behaviors, and all psychosocial indicators. So friendship being associated with 7 out of 7 psychological well-being outcomes, and also with all decreasing all 5 out of 5 psychological distress outcomes, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
And in even better news, this isn't only applicable to you if you have a friend group of 200 plus people who all come to your house every day, who you go on a walk with every 3 hours.
That's a lot of people.
The better news is that this is really achievable and your number of friendships doesn't have to be huge, just strong. So even 2 to 3 really good friendships brings you all of that goodness to your life and to your health. And is really exciting. And I really wanted to touch on the name of the study, which was called United We Thrive.
Oh,
and I thought that was so beautiful, and it makes me really appreciative for the friendships I have in my life.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great, Ella. Thanks for sharing. My good news bit is not really linked to this episode's theme.
Slow.
But it is a bit of happy climate news on coral reefs. And it's a lot more recent than the pieces you were talking about. So scientists working in the Caribbean have found that playing certain sounds from large underwater speakers could save damaged corals and bring whole coral reefs back to life.
So we're looking at a coral reef like DJ set.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Love it.
So they found that coral larvae, which are the free swimming early life stages of coral, were up to 7 times more likely to settle at a struggling reef where they played recordings of the snaps, grounds, grunts, and scratches that form the symphony of a healthy ecosystem underwater.
That's a little different of soundscapes than I was expecting, but that's still really cool.
I know, the plot twist.
What did you say? Snaps, grounds, grunts, and scratches.
Yep, those are the phrases that they use in the study, yep. And also, depending on how long you leave the speaker out for, this might also attract not just coral larvae, but fish back to the reef, so even more life. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Pretty cool. And it's a very simple solution for something that could have a really big positive impact on coral reefs and on our oceans, which is why I wanted to include it in this episode.
Oh, well, I love that. And it's always really good to hear positive climate news that is current and, showing us that the better future like today.
Yes.
So that's really, really cool. And I think a great way to wrap up that news section.
Yes. And something that we do at the end of all of our episodes is to leave some questions for our audience. So live listeners and listeners online, what is your favorite local third place and why? How is it fostering community? And is there sustainability or science involved?
And for those of you in the room, feel free to let us know in 2 minutes when we wrap up recording. Yes. But for those of you online, let us know on our socials. We're at sci_versed on everything, or you can email us as well. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to give an extra special big thank you to our live audience and to all other listeners. And thank you all for tuning in.
Yes, and thank you also to Inspiring ACT and the ACT government for making this live show possible. Also the Woden Library for their wonderful support.
And their amazing staff.
Yes. And finally to YWCA Canberra for their sponsorship of our amazing live podcast equipment.
The first time we're using it, so exciting.
Yes.
So wrapping up, we wanted to say to everyone, stay nerdy. And we will see you in our next episode.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, let's leave that on. It's even better without the headphones.
I know, it sort of muffles it a bit, hey?
Yeah.